Hey everybody, it is June 19th, 2025. Thanks again for watching the last 12 episodes of Frank About Health. We're at our season finale, and for that, even though I did the lessons learned episode last week, there's no way I could have done this season without the help of my guest today, which is Christopher Nelson. Christopher Nelson, I have had the fortune to meet at the Fordham Gabelli School of Business this past January, and we engaged in a project together involving artificial intelligence and looking at ways of maximizing the emphasis of Frank About Health, as well as the documentary that will soon be released, Being Frank for a Healthy Future, among other kinds of understanding of innovations that AI can bring in our current disruptive environment. And as you all have been listening over the last 8 or so weeks, we have featured Dr. Marschall Runge and his book, The Great Healthcare Disruption, to prove to be a narrative not only of our society's current disruption, but our own individual concerns for our family, if you're a caregiver. At the same time, if you have your own healthcare issues you need to resolve, you need to get the information on your own at this point. And I have always said that Frank About Health is one of the platforms that will give you as much accurate information as possible. But other than that, the reason for Christopher's appearance here is to summarize about how innovation in the disruptive healthcare environment is more critical now than ever. And I thought that it would be a very interesting discussion that even though he's on a healthcare show, we're going to be talking about health as points of content that are used with AI and other technology medium that he has experience in. So it's going to be more of a technology show, but it will be focused on the healthcare content that I've been providing over the past several, actually 4 years now. Now, that being said, to issue my disclaimer would be kind of irrelevant, but let's just put it this way. These are not the views of talkradio.nyc or of the show, but they are the views of the conversation between myself and Christopher Nelson for today's show. All right, that being said, Chris, why don't you do the honors and introduce your entire background that you feel that our audience would like to know about you? Because I know you more on a personal and professional level, and therefore I'm biased. I just figure you could be more objective.
Sure. No, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so like Frank said, I don't have, or like you've said, I don't have sort of direct experience in the healthcare industry, and have some direct experience in the technology industry. But I actually spent a lot of my career as an international school teacher, working overseas, and through sort of that journey, as a teacher, which kind of transitioned in recent years to a startup that I did in Japan, which is still ongoing. And is we're working to sort of incorporate AI into it to kind of enhance elements of it, similarly to how we looked at, for healthy media for Frank's company and Frank's content and everything like that. So sort of, leveraging AI like all companies should be, and most are, and I think all kind of should be these days.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it dabbled a bit with AI there, and then went into my MBA program, which I just completed at Fordham Gabelli, like Frank mentioned. And
Mhm.
so most of my tech background and expertise is more sort of, individual interest, sort of like that deep sort of interest in something, almost bordering on an obsession, which I think is also healthy for an entrepreneur. Um,
Exactly.
and I'm transitioning, now into a role, at a bigger tech firm called Infosys, which works at sort of AI incorporation, and information systems sort of changes, digital transformation, and just sort of like all the lifeblood, sort of the nervous systems and musculatory systems, of companies, large companies that are out there, big, small, mainly large, but
Yeah.
also, medium to smaller size companies as well, right? So if a company needs to sort of leverage the massive amounts of data that they've been collecting, maybe not doing that much with,
Mhm.
Infosys is a company that they would, seek to, leverage the services of. And I think that kind of
Right.
points to sort of AI, in general. There's just a lot of companies out there right now that have, in the healthcare space as well, probably even more
Yes.
so than many others, right? There's just so much data out there that we used to really not know what to do with, and now is sort of that pivotal time where, um, you know, AI is very much an umbrella term, and there are many, many types of it, which we learned in our course, Frank. But yeah,
Mhm.
so so how companies use that, whether it's the CRISPR conversation that you guys had recently with David Yang and Marshall Runge, and how that sort of has, that rapid advancement in technology and leveraging data and computational power to sort of achieve things that we haven't been able to achieve before. The whole
Right.
tech landscape is just like rapidly changing due to sort of the behind the scenes workings and all the various AI companies or even companies that weren't AI, but have kind of had a skunk works organization working in the background. If you're not familiar with that term, skunk works is sort of that, sort of like an R&D, not necessarily pertains to the regular day-to-day business of a company. So say,
Right.
Walmart probably is working on AI in some way, similar to, how we were thinking about, using AI in your company as well. So it's a part of
Right.
everything. Everybody's interested in it. Everybody should be interested in it. There's a lot of resistance to it as well from sort of day-to-day people, but there's a lot to be gained from it as well if we sort of approach it correctly with the right mindset and
Right.
have the data to power it.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I mean, if anything, when I started Frank About Health in 2021, the main focus was we were in the pandemic and Zoom was the way that everybody communicated, whether you learned, whether you worked, whether you were having reunions with family, whatever. And I just love the idea of being able to zoom out into the internet about different healthcare issues, especially at that time, COVID. But while I was continuing on that strategy, one of my biggest advocates was actress Retha Gray, who everyone on the network knows about. She had been on this program at least 10 times throughout the 3.5 years prior to her passing. But the thing is that all of a sudden I found myself in a pivot point. We had a new election, a new president take over. We were watching all these cutbacks going on. I'm dealing with grief at the same time while monitoring the caregiving of both my father and not to mention my cousin who's now in a nursing facility. So I've had a interesting 4 month time that class couldn't have come at a better time. And
Hmm.
there I was, just really just looking to learn something. And it turned out that our professor, RP, that he goes by, just decided to, because he has experience in healthcare, tried to understand what my podcast and what my business model that I had been creating was about. And all of a sudden he said, well, let's include it as a group project. So it's like it was a universe that brought us together, I think. And at the same time, it was like a natural pivot that I was forced to take. The reason why I give all of that background is because you obviously come across as a strategist by training, probably even through your various work experiences and the other ventures that you've been involved in. But how would you then transfer that strategy mindset into an ecosystem like healthcare, which is in utter chaos? That I think was not only the opportunity, but also the challenge that you probably found yourself not only at Gabelli handling with that project, but even
Mhm.
beyond that when we started to collaborate on other issues. How
Yeah.
would you apply your knowledge of strategy into healthcare? I guess is the fundamental question.
Yeah, I mean, just from the conversations with you and, of course, everybody follows healthcare to a certain extent. In the news, it tends to be a little bit more, it's either the super high highs or the super high low or super low lows. Like,
Right.
this company has taken, patients for, a run on their money or their wallets or whatever by, making very critical medication very inaffordable or something like that. Or it's, this new advancement is going to, cure cancer. I feel like we get that news headline every week. And so, I kind of taking a step back and kind of looking at like who are the stakeholders in the healthcare industry. And then and it kind of, this is not going to be sort of all encompassing or exhaustive, but I kind of view it as the companies that are, and sometimes these companies are one of the same, but there's the building of new advancements, right? So there's like the CRISPR invention or pushing the boundaries of the medication or new medications or new types of diagnoses, all
Yes.
that kind of stuff, right? So like the typical sort of tech being, applied to advance a certain discipline or field. And then there's also sort of those companies that just provide healthcare, provide access to medicine, ship medications, things like that. And then there's also just like the patients, whether that's like, institutional patients like hospitals that are receiving, the advancements, as newly tested sort of equipment or the, the MRI machines that have been life-changing and have been around for a while, and the patients that are individual, like you, myself. And that's like obviously sort of the most important one, right? Sort of the end
Right.
consumer of all healthcare and help, and just the advancements that occur. And so I
Yeah.
think about sort of AI and how it's changing things, and it's different for each of those sort of stakeholder groups, right? So like,
Yes.
again, back to the CRISPR conversation, like with, AI being more powerful, computational power being more powerful, they're able to genome sequence or do, crazy things that we wouldn't, in our wildest dreams have been able to imagine or whatever, that it would come so soon, right? It was like, oh, this is, being able to do that in its entirety or, completely would be, 10, 20, 30 years away. And with AI, we're finding those advancements are coming, almost like rapid fire. And it's a bit like,
Right.
I imagine not being in the industry myself, but I imagine those that are reading the white papers, following the advancements of various sort of new technologies that are coming out and the successes that they're seeing, it's like drinking from a fire hose. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a new one here, there's a new one there, there's a new one here, there's a new one there. And
Yeah.
then at the same time, the companies say like Pfizer or whatever, I know that they also do some of that technology and advancements of, new medications and things, but they're also very much in the business of just getting medications out to people and things like that, right?
Yes.
And AI for them is more similar, I guess, to, any sort of big, um, big tech or, big company that's shipping things, right? Their supply chain logistics or this, that, or the other, the analyzing data and which things patients are wanting or needing or looking up and all that kind of stuff. They're leveraging AI on their back end, in a different
Right.
way. And then consumers, it's a little bit like, okay, where do we fit in? The companies, it's kind of like the rich get richer, or in this sense, it's like the companies kind of keep pushing the advancements up and they're leveraging AI to its fullest, degree for their needs. So what does the
Right.
end consumer do? How do we use it? And there's, certain companies are creating sort of like this AI sort of doctor health bot, chat bots kind of thing. There's also just leveraging a regular LLM like ChatGPT and things like that to just kind of do that, even though doctors in the past they hated it, like, oh, I Googled my, you know, symptoms and I know now what I think I have. And the doctors are like, I have a job and you've set your mind that you have X, but you really have Y or whatever. That I think maybe is getting, if you know how to leverage AI correctly and do that sort of prompt engineering with Gen AI, it could actually be quite useful to calm your mind or have a little bit of direction, go into
Yes.
a conversation with a real medical professional with a little bit more sort of understanding or composure, I guess, a little bit more research. So
Correct.
AI is affecting each of these areas, I think, in very different ways, but it definitely is affecting, all aspects of healthcare across the board.
Well, we're about to take our first break, but I can make one comment about Pfizer. Pfizer has been definitely innovative. As you know, they were the founders of the mRNA vaccine for COVID, and
Mhm.
mRNA is a technology. It's not an actual virus. And
Right,
not to mention, they are the inventors of Viagra, which was
right.
originally a heart medication, and we all know what positive side effect has emerged from that. So I guess they do get involved in trial and error, and in most cases come up with a new innovative opportunity. I think strategically, as you were saying, it's now the haves and have nots again. When you
Hmm.
have new innovations, can you afford them, especially when you need them? And
Right.
we're going to cover all of that in our next section when we return, right here on this episode of Frank About Health, which is entitled Reimagining Healthcare. We'll be back in a few.
Are you a conscious co creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey everybody, and welcome back. Now, Chris, as you know, we were just spent the last 15 minutes talking about how during my last season of Frank About Health, the biggest transition I had to do with the show itself was really highlight the fact that we were going through both a social and technological healthcare disruption, and there was no better advocate than Dr. Marschall Runge. So I went on for my first ever AI-oriented webinar to promote the book with a QR code. I think I even went to you for some consulting on how to make that happen, and it was just a matter of contacting his social media team, and they collaborated, which was a nice thing. Then, of course, I kind of bookended it by having two appearances, not with Dr. Marschall Runge, with both my co-host Phyllis Quinlan, and at the same time, as you mentioned earlier, David Yang, and we were able to just look at the research industry perspective with David, and at the same time, the medical perspective with Phyllis. But at the same time, what was lacking was the understanding that because of the disruption that is going on, there is the fundamental knowledge that you have to kind of create an ecosystem, sort of like if you're running a business when you're only looking at your own individualized healthcare. You mentioned the stakeholders. You're actually a passive stakeholder because you're the one receiving, hopefully, the treatment, the care, the technology solution that might be offered to you based on your condition. But then you also might not be a beneficiary of that solution because maybe the condition is just not treatable or whatever the circumstances may be. So being that those four shows were very instrumental in highlighting a guide, I still have a lot of what ifs and a lot of question marks. Now, I know ChatGPT has been able to help out, but like you said, a human intervention is needed, whether it's the doctor or if it's a mental health issue, a therapist, someone that you can really circle back with and verify if what you're reading is actually significant. But there's always going to continue to be those what ifs. So when you're dealing with that faced opportunity for error or missing information, obviously we see in regular media there's a lot of misinformation that likes to exacerbate that. But on my show, I try to fill in all those holes.
Right.
What would be your opinion as to how that can probably best maximize, or do I have to allow for continued gaps in information?
Right.
What would be your take?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that, no matter what, there's always going to be a bit of sort of information misalignment. There's always going to be more information that we desire that we might not have access to. But with AI, I think there is the potential for, the average or, the less informed to become more informed, or the average user to be more knowledgeable on sort of like how to maximize sort of the healthcare or the information, whatever it is that they're looking for. And certainly, talking about sort of this podcast and sort of, if you have more information because of AI, you have needs because you're, a healthcare sort of consumer, I guess you could say.
Right.
There is still that, like, where are the professionals outside of just like my doctor, which, that can be expensive to go to or whatever, of course, hopefully health insurance covers all those meetings and everything like that. But where to get that, good source of knowledge. And there are plenty of sort of podcasts and things like that, or information spaces that are out there for sort of targeted specific sort of like, maybe it's like biohacking, right? Like Andrew Huberman is a well-known podcaster, and he's all about sort of increasing longevity, and he talks about sort of this or that type of advancement or new tool or new, maybe it's like Apple Watches, and sort of using sort of your biometric data to sort of be more knowledgeable about your own body and things like that, and give sort of tips and tricks there. But when it comes to especially like, caregivers, right? So if you're, caring for an elderly family member, or you yourself are sort of ailing and want to know sort of what to expect, like, maybe you have a terminal disease that doesn't have a solution right now, or a cure or a treatment or whatever it is that's super effective. Being tapped in, it's an exciting time, I think, hopefully for many of those people, because of what AI and what tech is sort of empowering healthcare professionals in like sort of the development space to do, right? So I
Right.
imagine that in the next, again, I'm not a healthcare professional, but I imagine, we're going to be seeing quite a few sort of big ticket items on that, like, terminal disease list start to have solutions to them, or at least beginnings, and hope that's not sort of so far away on the horizon. It's coming closer and closer. And so
Right.
that will definitely excite a lot of people, whether it's care for the elderly, Alzheimer's, whatever it is, or something personal that you have, cancer, obviously a big one. And so tapping into a space where professionals like Dr. Runge, and David Yang, and other people that you've had on this show come and sort of talk about that disruption in sort of in one space, in one localized sort of community, where you can,
Right.
if I was listening to the podcast and I was one of those people that was really hoping for clarity on something that I'm, excited about or nervous about because there isn't a solution to yet, being able to
Right.
put forth questions, or being able to sort of look at what conversations are happening here. I think that's sort of the missing element that would be good for a lot of people. And I'm sure that there are some other sort of information spaces out there that lend itself to that type of conversation. But yeah, creating one with, people with the pedigree and knowledge and experience that you can trust to talk
Right.
about sort of those big ticket items and the disruption that's happening out, in all spaces, but particularly healthcare, I think is a valuable way to, at least, if not entirely, fill the gaps in information that exist.
Mhm.
Definitely can help sort of support those individuals and get the information that people are sort of hoping for.
So that being said, even though many industries have disruptions, like the internet was a disruption for the music
For sure.
industry,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I was in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a disruption for the book industry,
Mhm.
among other industries. But in this case, when you have healthcare disruption seems to be the opportunity and
Right.
not the downfall. So maybe is disruption the wrong word? Maybe is there another, well, I know we've been talking about how having thought leaders and podcasters and people like Dr. Marschall Runge to continue to advocate for the focus of what the disruption is. But without the disruption, you wouldn't have the new solutions or innovations that are needed. So, what do you think strategically would be your opinion as to what's more appropriate for what we're experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, I think disruption is a great word, and you're right that there's, with disruption, that can be a term that's used sort of in sort of a negative light. It's like kind of ruin things or whatever. It really, I'm not sure exactly what the Webster
Puts people
dictionary
on edge.
definition is, but it's a change of the status quo, and tends to, involve some sort of like paradigm shift.
Right.
And with healthcare, I think almost entirely, I feel like it's much easier to see how that'll only be a good type of disruption within the healthcare industry. For some companies, maybe, I'm trying to think of an example that's similar to sort of the book industry, right? Barnes and Noble going out of business and all that kind of stuff because of, Amazon and the internet. Um, Sorry, I'm not sure if is there loud construction coming through with my sound?
No, I don't hear anything.
Okay, so good. There's a little construction outside New York City. But yes, so
Exactly.
so yeah, so I think in the healthcare space, especially with the type of disruption that we have right now, it's not like a disruption in the sense of like a lack of resources. It's not disruption in the sense of, really intense political, sort of worldwide agenda to make healthcare inaccessible, or, especially in America, healthcare is really driven by the sort of for-profit companies that are developing. And and there's arguments to be said this way or that way, and we're not going to get into those opinions and things,
Right.
but
Exactly.
sort of the argument to be made about why America does produce sort of a lot of the, largest healthcare sort of advancements in terms of technology and things, is that there's just so much funding, right? It's a little bit more of that free market. And so those companies being able to fund the use of AI, which is very cost intensive, right? So like the compute costs, the data storage and housing and all that kind of stuff, and the technology transformational change that those companies will have to undergo in order to really leverage AI. Um, you know, I think that disruption word in healthcare is going to be a little bit more on that positive side for the end user or consumer, of healthcare, right? Anybody who's hoping for an advancement here, an advancement there. Um,
Right.
I think, yeah, I think that we're looking at sort of an exciting time ahead in terms of what type of care people are going to give, and very pie in the sky, and this extends beyond healthcare as well, with AI and the advancements the way that it'll impact and disrupt sort of across the board. There's certainly some fear around sort of job loss and all that kind of stuff. But then there's also opportunity for sort of, universal basic income being more of a reality now than it was before, right? If there's
True.
things like LLMs or, any type of AI that's kind of picking up a lot of the slack and increasing sort of profits for companies or whatever it is, or the government or politics, or there likely then can be a little bit more sort of excess funds that can be directed towards, especially those in need, those that are,
Right.
the biggest users of healthcare, right? So
Right.
I think that there's a lot of unknowns, but we're in for sort of with some teething aches, I think, in the short term, with that shifting of where jobs will be or not be and all that kind of stuff, and what's going to
Yes.
happen with healthcare or elsewhere. There'll be some teething aches, but once the dust starts to settle and we really kind of have the AI and sort of accompanying computational power there to really just like advance the things that will help people and society the most, sort of in place. I think that we're going to see people living longer. I think we're going to see people having quicker and easier access to information and the healthcare they need.
Yes.
Funds, or sort of that universal basic income kind of conversation comes a little bit more to the forefront. So I'm very much a technology optimist. You can probably from my wording and take on things, but um,
Yes.
I think you also got to be when everything's kind of so uncertain and there is so much disruption, uh,
Yes.
and it's inevitable, right? People aren't going to turn off the AI switch because people are like, oh, I don't like it anymore. It's too powerful and too um, sort of unfortunately positive for the pockets of sort of
Right.
the people developing it and leveraging it, um, that it's not going away. And so looking at sort of the silver lining in it, I think is really important. So I think disruption is a positive case, especially in the healthcare space, and also generally sort of across the board, for in a large part.
What's very interesting is I know we're about to take our second break, but Dr. Marshall Runge wrote the book a year ago before the current administration was even in place. And I know he was talking mainly from a positive position,
Mm.
especially in the chapters of the book where he mentions mRNA and CRISPR and AI and all ways to get your information personally, your HIPAA records, things like that.
Right, right,
But I guess when it was released already when there was a lot of chaos and disruption going on, it really just offered a secret lesson to me, at least. And I wanted to verify that with you before we go to our break. Would you say that when dealing with healthcare disruption, as it is either prescribed on the news, I don't know if prescribed is the right word, or described, or even described with the innovations and the positive attitude that you take, that people should look currently and going forward, that when there's healthcare disruption, own the information outright, become very entrepreneurial about your healthcare? Is that the stance that we should all be taking?
I mean, I get very much my opinion, but I do agree with that. I think that, there's something to be said about AI making it so that you can kind of trust, like, agentic AI is a big conversation. It's sort of like the next frontier where
Mm.
sort of AI agents, where you give them access to or the ability to sort of make purchases or, apply for jobs or do whatever it is, like do full things, go out and act on the internet rather than just be sort of an interface for information like ChatGPT currently is. So
Right.
having it go out on your behalf and do things, the take where some people might be like, oh, okay, I just trust it because of the privacy settings and this, that, or the other. I'm going to let that AI agent, be my full-on doctor or whatever it is. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen. But there is that sort of just, Jesus take the wheel, but in this case, and maybe that's sacrilegious, but AI take the wheel. Um, but I think very much I think it's always important for people to own their own information. Also like with that, I mentioned Andrew Huberman, that biohacking, right? That you can collect so much data on your own health, what's currently going on in your body, in your gut, in your mind, from the electrical outputs of your body that, different wearable devices and things like that can take, or just doing simple sort of run of blood tests, which are relatively inexpensive, to then be like, oh, I know exactly sort of what's going on with my body. So the more informed you are about what's going on and what's causing it or not causing it, or where, the holes or gaps are in your health and things, owning it and working with it to improve it, I think is something everybody should do. AI, I think, will be something that, if you're doing that, you can then also leverage those, chat bots or whatever it is,
Yes.
to be like, oh, this is all my data. I trust you with it or whatever. But here, what would be your advice? It's not, I'm not alien from anything, and I'm not asking, what I should, how to, give myself an IV or something like that that only, I should do. But like, should I, run more? Should I eat more of this or less of that? Or should I take these pills or those pills, sort of over the counter, like, I don't know, supplements or whatever it is, safe and benign things that AI would probably be able to give you really good sort of feedback on.
Right.
Yeah, definitely, I think own your data. Some people I'm sure will be like, I own it, but I'm gonna, yeah, AI take the wheel kind of approach as well.
All right, everybody, we'll be back in a few.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. If you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitch and have any questions for myself or Christopher, please go into your chat bot or chat box, rather, or anything that you normally speak to people while you're watching a live stream. Actually, being that this is a pre-record, you're probably going to be best to email us. So that being said, you can email me at frankrharrison1@gmail.com. Or would you be open to taking any questions as well, or do you want me to funnel them through my email?
Maybe funnel them through yours would be good, I think, for now.
Okay, great. That all being said, ladies and gentlemen, Chris is a wealth of knowledge. He already just covered what we were going to cover on section 3. But that's fine, because now it gives us such an organic time frame to really reflect on what Frank About Health has done this season, to mirror a lot of what Chris was just talking about, with AI really having much of a driving force in the healthcare space going forward. Now, as we were talking about, Dr. Marschall Runge being an author and also the vice president of the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor in the medical department, as well as CEO of Michigan Medicine, and not to mention president of his CEO of the Michigan Medicine, which is the hospital, and president of the medical school, or dean. I'm not even sure which anymore. He's got so many titles, but he's definitely what both Chris and I had been talking about, a voice of disruption. That being said, if you looked at the other shows, we had a chance to meet with Mark Filerman, who was also with David Yang, and not to mention, we met with Deepak Sani, who is a referral from Linda Marsanico. Linda Marsanico, who is also has a sister or a companion show on the network, The A Train to Sedona, basically introduced me to Deepak Sani, and she has always been on a journey to love and compassion through her book, The A Train to Sedona. But I would say that she's a voice of managing disruption, and she provided me with a guest of hers that is also striving to be a centenarian, and he created his own model, the Time Model, TIIME, in order to guarantee longevity with his life past 100. Now, that sounds like another voice of disruption. So apparently, I guess by default, I created a trend last season. And that being said, Chris, I'm opening up the door for us to talk about such an opportunity that we were touching upon. Would you like to share with the
Yeah.
audience what I'm referring to?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, in our work together, especially it kind of started right around when you and Dr. Runge began communications and sort of did the book campaign on the show and everything, and it just seemed like it was such a we talked a little bit about filling in that gap of information for the types of listeners and things like that that come to the show, and just anybody who's interested in the healthcare and sort of the healthcare disruption space, having a space where people with the pedigree, the background, and the knowledge and expertise, like Dr. Runji and the other guests that you mentioned, them coming on the show talking about literally disruption, or just sort of any of the advancements and things that we're facing today. It just seemed like a really good sort of nexus to build where, if you build it, they will come. So if there are people like that on the show, then it's a trusted source of information, and it's a place where you can come and get more. One, those voices will want to come on the show, and two, the listeners will want to follow. Dr. Runji has his own following, or David Yang has his own following, and all that kind of stuff. I don't really have a following, so I'm not sure how much sort of
Hopefully,
loose.
by being on this show, will give you a share of the
Well,
following.
yeah. Maybe this is the start to my podcast career.
Maybe.
But no, but I think it just is. It almost is like a disservice to not sort of grab that opportunity to be like, oh, okay, these people have come on the show to talk about a really important topic that can really help people and fill in that information gap kind of thing.
Hmm.
So let's keep going with it. So, more people like them coming on the show to provide really good information, touch on different topics. And I also would imagine, I tend to in my own work, I mentioned stakeholders before, but I like to think about sort of the end user and sort of who is this information for? What is this service or product or whatever? Who's the sort of the person at the end of the line, that's going to use it or need it the most? And I imagine a lot of the people that are listening to this type of content or coming to your show or shows like it, are looking, I imagine maybe not all, but maybe quite a few have an ailment themselves or a relative that has a serious ailment or is in search of sort of some answers and support and information on that type of topic. And so sort of directing it towards really targeting and helping those people with the questions and sort of help or answers that they're looking for, I
Hmm.
think is a really powerful thing to do. And also, like Mark Filerman said on your recent episode, sort of, when it comes to startups and people who are trying to build something or disrupt something or, make a change or build a product or build a business. I hope I'm gathering and recommunicating his thoughts correctly. But I remember him saying that the people who have sort of a vested interest in sort of the, a personal connection to the problem, they
Right.
experience that problem themselves. And those are the ones that you really want to trust in solving it. And you yourself, you've shared openly that you've had some, you were driven towards this from experiencing health or healthcare sort of
Well,
issues and things.
healthcare advocacy with my father and cousin, and my life living with epilepsy.
Exactly, yeah. And so, knowing that and knowing that you're the host with that sort of personal connection, personal tie that you'll you'll really do justice and do a good service to the end listener, the end user, is something that I think then, again, it would be irresponsible not to sort of grasp the opportunity to bring more voices of disruption on, which is sort of leading into that
Yeah.
conversation about, sort of transitioning to a mini series or, just a whole season or a whole other sort of podcast focus that's really creating that space where people can come get the information they need, ask those questions. And yeah, hopefully it's a revolving door of people like Dr. Runge.
Yes.
He's quite high up in his pedigree and things like that. So I'm not sure how many out there are out there, but getting people that have important things to say on here that can help people at the end user, I think is really powerful and important work to do.
I guess it also fundamentally shows that, especially when there is so much misinformation in our media or in society, that we all have to band together
Hmm.
based on the experience with the ailment or the condition that is being discussed, and literally independently help each other out regardless of whatever their status is in society, and
Right.
all the fundamental things that most people worry about when there is no ailment to concern themselves with. When you're in the homeostatic state, when everything is okay, healthcare is furthest from the conversation. It's all about
Right.
travel and making money and relationships and whatever. But what makes it so disrupting is that when healthcare becomes a constant for people, they can't afford it, not enough medication, or better yet, an illness that could be considered terminal,
Right.
that's their norm.
Yeah.
That they're never going to engage in that kind of situation. So it may look like a disruption, but it's really their norm. And
Yeah.
then, therefore, the voices of disruption might be a good platform to bring those people with their own. I hate the word echo chamber, but it's the same thing. It's
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
own
No, yeah.
voice
It's like,
box.
yeah, a
You know,
support system or ecosystem of,
that's it, support
and
system.
and that's where, places like, you know, that people have different views on Reddit, but one, it's very diverse, right? There's the dark parts of Reddit where, people are, not behaving all that great and things, but some of the more active subreddits and things are people talking about, of course, they're just hobbies and interests and things like that, but also people looking for advice, right? So it's like there's a lot of sort of healthcare sort of spaces in there, and that's where people, regardless of political belief or ideology, whatever, cancer doesn't have one, right? So it's like, how do I deal with this, right? And
Right.
whether maybe in person, based on the dress or political, whatever, that you see that person, you'd be like, oh, I'd never talk to them based on my ideology or whatever it is. Hopefully, everybody's a little more open-minded than that. Obviously, they are not. But on a place where that they're there for you share that similar sort of disruptive, norm, new norm or disruption that has become a norm.
Right.
People are honest and sort of forthcoming with their advice and their experiences, and you take and leave the information that you need. And so, creating sort of a more open, not just text-based online community forum or whatever it is. It's kind of like you know like new mom support groups or whatever, right? So it's like my sister-in-law. I recently became a nephew. My brother's wife gave birth, and so seeing how important that was, right? That's a very good new health norm to have, right? Is to be
Yes.
pregnant, if you're, intending to and looking forward to that and everything like that. It tends to be a
Yes.
happy time, but it still is a very intense time, right? Her body or any new mother and father, your life is changing, everything is changing, and so seeking a support group and system that has all the right information, especially, oh, there's this new disruptive technology that can make pregnancy a little more comfortable to this, that, or the other. And so having the medical professional that's sort of guiding those conversations for those new mothers and having those other mothers there to come together and share information and experiences and grow with each other, also very powerful. And so this, sort of space, voices of disruption, sort of what we're calling it, is, a very, it's a little bit more open-ended, but it's very much to that same end of just a support system for those that are looking for information and looking to kind of cut through the fog of AI or politics or this or that or the other and find the answers they need from professionals and people who are like at the forefront or at the highest echelon of doing that work, like Dr. Runge and your other guests.
Right.
So important work.
That all being said, we'll take our final break and then we will wrap up and talk about how the future of healthcare looks for us to take our own initiative and reimagine it. All right, we'll be back. See you soon. Kids, did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, a.k.a. the corporate cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Meltesh Desange, inviting you to serving up success with a splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
Cheers.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Now, you've heard over the last 45 minutes about how innovation in healthcare is pretty much an answer in managing what is perceived negative disruptions, which are really opportunities in disguise. And we all need to band together through a There are other aspects of what Frank About Health has done over the last 4 years. And fortunately, Chris was able to see the last 10 episodes, or at least hear about them in the process of what I've been pivoting the show in the direction of. That being said, Chris, in reimagining healthcare, like the title of this episode, or even if you were to compare it to the future of healthcare as it's delivered, received, researched, or even practiced, what suggestions would you have for me as I've created this umbrella company, Healthy Media, to hold all of my intellectual property that advocates for healthcare, the podcast Frank About Health, my documentary, which will soon come out, and not to mention any other things that I choose to develop in the future? What would you recommend strategically, with your own IT knowledge and expertise, would be a better way for me to take what I've already got and enhance it further to really get one-on-one with people, to give them the clarity of thought when it comes to their healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of avenues and ways to kind of take it. That's one of the, again, I'm glass half full and sort of a little rose tinted glasses when it comes to AI. Um, but there are plenty of ways that you can take it. And one sort of kind of more obvious one is as the listeners and the viewers and people sort of come through the door for the value add of voices of disruption and sort of this nexus of good information and ecosystem, support system, all those sort of terms that we use to describe this community space. Then if there is sort of that, maybe you're inundated with far more questions that you can answer in a podcast or whatever it is, working to develop sort of an AI chatbot that, maybe it's on your website or, there are ones that are already being made, but having them be sort of fed with the data from these conversations, and then sort of cross-referenced and also confirmed and validated through existing information that is definitely accurate or as accurate as can be, because, I'm sure at some point in this episode, even I've said something that, might be a little off or isn't sort of verifiable fact kind of thing. And so having a chatbot that, users or people can kind of go into and be like, hey, Frank and his guest talked about XYZ. I was hoping to get some more information on that. Where can I go to get even more information, or what white papers out there exist to kind of really give me positive information. And to a certain extent, ChatGPT can already do that. But if you're trying to be more on one-on-one with the users, and they're wanting to do that as well, then having your data, the conversations turned in from, there's plenty of AI tools that can scrape sort of the convert video and audio into text and then create that sort of data housing and things like that so that it then is, easily accessible for a chatbot or something like that. It's no small task to sort of create that. It can be cost intensive, time intensive, all that kind of stuff. But if so, it's becoming easier and cheaper to do as well. But if something like that exists, then it provides a great opportunity for people to even further sort of narrow that information gap, right? So if they're coming here because, this is the information that's out here, this is the information I need, and the people that are in charge of those two institutions, whether it's like, I'm imagining like a doctor versus like all of the different medical advancements that are happening. And you're like, I'm not sure where to go or what the future is for me and my ailments or my needs. Already, Voice of Disruption is trying to close that gap a little bit. But, say there's, X number, sort of a massive number or whatever of listeners, ideally, for you and your business and things like that, but also just because then they're coming here for that information gap closure. You're not going to be able to answer everybody's question and interface with every single user or question that comes through the door. And so providing sort of, again, a chatbot fed with your information, fed with real medical data and all that kind of stuff is an attractive, I think, tool for you to provide to sort of your customers, right? Those end users like we've been talking about. And then there's also just sort of like the standard that anybody can use, which is leveraging AI to just get the word out there more, right? So that's marketing or, clipping podcasts and sound bites and things and having it go out onto social medias and sort of different information or community spaces where the right sort of target user could, hear about your podcast, hear about this great space to learn really good information that might help them, and then they come through the door. So there's a bunch of ways or avenues to proceed with, and boost your business, boost your reach, and all in the end goal of helping people out, which again I think is a noble effort.
Well, what would you say are the like top two or three audience bases? Educational institutions, medical schools, medical institutions themselves, the hospital systems, or even others that I haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's to pivot or kind of reframe that question a little bit. There's, every company like my company as well that we have the users, the people that use our app and sort of want to leverage our services, and then there's sort of the creators or the content sort of producers that are on our app. And our app in Japan is really it's in the business of sort of connecting, famous or knowledgeable people with their sort of fan group and allowing them to directly interact. And so we really view it as almost two business models. There's the people that are sort of the content creators, the institution. In your case, that'd be the institutions, the educational institutions or medical institutions, and people like Dr. Runge or anybody who might come on your podcast. And then there's the listeners. And so it's kind of, do you target these ones? And that's where that conversation of if you build it, they will come kind of thing is where if you create a good space and a good sort of vision around what the mission and vision is of Frank About Health and Voices of Disruption, more of them hopefully will come on. And if they come on, these ones come on, and if the users come on. And so it's, using AI to probably target more this rather than the institutions and things like that. But once you have enough of these, then AI to empower, if you got enough users and people that are interested in the podcast, then you have enough sort of funding and abilities and resources and sort of reason to put in that sort of probably, business intensive effort to create some sort of AI enhancement to power the end user, power your reach and things like that. And then even more. So it's a bit of a sort of a feedback loop or a cycle of target this, then target that. Then you get to a point where some disruptive pivot point or more disruptive, sort of adding that disruptive technology in, can make it so that you're kind of then able to kind of target and enhance sort of the value proposition to both the listeners and the people that might want to come on, the institutions that might want to come on or get involved. Yeah, so I think it's kind of like most businesses, you need to kind of look at sort of not just your business being, I do this one thing for one end user. A lot of businesses have, Walmart, they have the consumers, but they also have all of their partners and vendors and things like that as well. So
Right.
there's always sort of more stakeholders and more cooks in the kitchen than an entrepreneur or business executives tend to think. At a high level, obviously, people are much more aware of all of the different stakeholders involved in sort of a business and things. And so, yeah, I think it's identifying what's that low-hanging fruit and what's that first target. Is it more users? Is it more, content creators kind of thing, or, Dr. Runge's and people like him to come on? And then, yeah, making that decision and kind of bouncing a bit back and forth and determining how much of your resources go here when, how much of your resources go here when. And then at a certain point, ideally, you have enough of both to be like, oh, okay, now I can take on that intensive effort to really incorporate AI into my business. And I think the same thing goes for sort of the average person, your listeners and things like that as well, is how much effort do I put towards just interfacing with the doctors and getting X amount of information with the resources I have and the time I have versus how much time do I spend sort of online looking for community spaces like Voices of Disruption or leveraging AI to get the information I need. People always have to, life is a series of choices. And so making those, taking that step back and looking big picture at what is the best choice for me right now, knowing that I can always make that other choice later on. Yeah, it's just an important sort of, yeah, that's how I tend to, view my trajectory and day to day or, professional or thinking about the world kind of thing as well.
Well, you hit it right on the mark. We have 1 minute left before we close out for the day. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Nelson is definitely the person that I turned to during the last 12 episodes of this season, especially when pivoting away from what was a hospitality oriented show with Hilton Hotels, and then of course losing Retha as it happened, and realizing that slowly was an opportunity to go in the direction, especially when our country needed more information, more relevant information. And I'm going to be making sure that when I return in 2 weeks with my next season of Frank About Health, it is with a lot of the guidance and direction that Chris outlined throughout the show. That all being said, Voices of Disruption will be coming out as a new podcast at some point. That's kind of like the hint, but we don't have any other dates or information on that as of yet. As I also said, my documentary will be coming out around my 150th episode, which is next month sometime. I want to thank Jesse behind the scenes for this particular episode because he was also involved in a lot of aspects of things, including the documentary. And I also want to thank the next show, I apologize on that one again. At the same time, I want to point out that our next show at 6 o'clock is Success with a Splash with Bruce Kramer. And I will see you in 2 weeks right here. Thanks again, Chris, for being here. And thanks for watching the last 12 episodes. And buy Dr. Marschall Runge's book, The Great Healthcare Disruption. It's on Amazon. All right. Have a good night.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you, Jesse.
Right. Okay. Bye.